Hi everyone, my name is Roisin and I'm from Seeking Science, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about charismatic animals and conservation. So what do I mean by charismatic animals? Well, there's no strict definition, but generally an animal can be considered charismatic if it is A, instantly recognizable. So for example, if I show you this picture of a lion, you'll probably know what it is. B, it needs to be known by name. So again, if you look at this picture, you'll probably be able to tell me that that is an elephant. Lastly, they should also be associated with a specific habitat. So if you look at a dolphin, for example, you'll probably be aware that it lives in the sea. So what are some of the types of animals that we might not find so appealing? Well, maybe these are some of the types of creatures that spring to mind. It's clear then that there are animals that we like and those that we might not like so much. But why is this? Firstly, let's examine what the most charismatic species actually are. A survey conducted in 2018 revealed the 20 most charismatic species, based on questionnaires as well as things like looking at the images that zoos put up on their websites. The results are here, and not surprisingly, we have species like tigers and lions right at the top of the list. Most of these are large, terrestrial animals, and interestingly, 18 out of the top 20 are mammal species. So why are we so drawn to mammals? Well, as mammals ourselves, there are a couple of reasons why we find other mammals so appealing. One reason is simply because they are the most physically similar to us. So looking at a bear, for example, we can see that it has legs, ears, a head, and so on, just like we do. Another big factor is the ability to recognize a face, which is a lot easier to do in animals like wolves, for example, than, say, a spider. Lastly, we tend to like animals that resemble human babies, with round faces and big eyes, which is again more commonly found in mammal babies than, say, a baby snake, for example. This is known as the baby schema and actually activates a part of our brains known as the mesocorticolimbic system, which is involved with motivation and reward, so it's no wonder that we're obsessed with cute baby animals. So we know why we tend to like some animals, but what are some of the reasons for our dislike of others? Well, there are some historic and evolutionary causes which tend to set off big alarm bells in our heads when we see some of these uncharismatic species. This is because some of them have historically been associated with disease. For example, although they are mammals, a lot of people tend to dislike rats, and this could in part be due to their association with diseases such as the bubonic plague. Going back even further in evolutionary history, some theories state that we've learned to fear animals like snakes and spiders because of the threat of poison or venom from them. There's also the perception of some species as pests that might threaten agricultural crops, which obviously doesn't make them very popular. So what does all of this mean for conservation? It probably comes as no surprise that charismatic animals are the ones most likely to benefit from conservation schemes. For example, the giant panda was chosen as the logo for the WWF just because it's so recognizable and charismatic, and it's these big, fluffy, iconic animals that we see portrayed in animal charity adverts most often. Plus, they're usually the ones that draw in the largest crowds at zoos, so people are more exposed to these animals than they might be to others. Of course, this means that some species are losing out on protection, and this has been highlighted during the COVID-19 pandemic. There are a few reasons why people tend to dislike bats, and it's a long and complicated history, and it's hard to summarize in just a couple of points. But one main factor is just pure fear of the animals, which probably has a lot to do with their association with nighttime, darkness, and vampires. Another is the perceived link between bats and the spread of diseases such as Ebola and, of course, COVID-19. This could be a whole video in itself, but the main point that I want to make here is that these factors are making bats even more endangered than they already are due to lack of funding for conservation programs, as well as persecution by people who fear them. Education about bats, their role in the ecosystem, as well as tackling misconceptions about them are crucial if we're going to protect these amazing creatures. On the flip side, it could be said that being charismatic is actually not always a good thing. This graph shows the percentage of people who answered incorrectly to the question, is this species endangered? So whilst it seems a decent amount of people were right about polar bears being threatened, a lot less were aware about lions and giraffes being endangered. This second figure highlights how, because certain animals are so common in our culture, whether in movies, TV shows, brands, and advertising, people perceive these animals in mainstream media and conjure up a virtual population which doesn't correlate to what's actually going on in the wild. The authors of this study carried out a survey in France to see how often people encountered images of these charismatic animals on a daily basis. And one of their findings was that people saw on average 4.4 lions per day, whether that's in advertisements, movies, kids' toys, and this means that people are seeing on average 2 to 3 times as many virtual lions as there currently are living in West Africa. So it seems that the use of charismatic species in conservation campaigns as well as in mainstream media is altering our perception of the status of these animals. So, how are we going to change things to make conservation more balanced? Well, images of animals can be found in around 20% of all advertisements and brands. Now, if a company wants to use an image of a celebrity in their branding, they'd have to pay for that right. So why isn't it the same with using images of animals? This is where an initiative set up in June 2018 may be able to change things. The lion's share was set up by the United Nations Development Programme and has David Attenborough as one of its ambassadors. The idea is to encourage brands to donate 0.5% of their media spend wherever they use animal imagery to the fund, which will then distribute the money to conservation charities around the world. 0.5% doesn't sound like a lot, but if the world's top 10 advertisers signed up, it would mean an annual donation of $47 million. This is all well and good for the animals that are likely to get chosen to be in advertisements. But what about the animals we talked about earlier that we tend not to find so endearing? Well, people are starting to recognize that we need to acknowledge these ugly animals and do something about their conservation. For example, the Ugly Animals Preservation Society is a stand-up comedy show in which comedians and scientists put forward a pitch for their favorite ugly animal, and then the audience votes for their favorite, which becomes the town's ugly mascot. So it helps to raise awareness for species that people might not otherwise get to hear about. Likewise, organizations such as BirdLife International are trying to challenge perceptions that we might have of certain species, such as in this campaign where they're trying to educate people about the importance of vultures in African ecosystems. So it all boils down to raising awareness and challenging misconceptions that we have of certain uncharismatic species. You might now be wondering what you can do to change things, which is great. The first thing that you need to do is educate yourself about some of the animals that you might have misconceptions about and start to challenge those biases. Next, you can share what you learn with friends, family, and on social media. Lastly, if you can, support organizations such as the Ugly Animal Preservation Society, as well as the Lion's Share by putting pressure on companies to contribute to conservation efforts. It's about time we showed some love to our uncharismatic animals. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you've learned something, but please do bear in mind that this is a much more complex issue than I've got time to talk about in this video, but hopefully it's been a useful summary. If you'd like to learn more about Seeking Science, you can check out our website at www.seekingscience.org. You can also follow us on Twitter at SeekingSci, on Instagram at Seeking Science Blog, and search us up on Facebook. Thank you!